The next bill we have up is House File 3837, Representative Hornstein. This is crimes motivated by bias. Representative Hassan moves that House File 3837 be recommended to be referred to the Ways and Means Committee. Is that right, Representative Hassan?
So moved, Mr. Chair.
Then Representative Hornstein, now that we have the bill before us, you have an amendment. It says the A1. This amendment puts the bill in the shape the author desires. Is that correct, Representative Hornstein? You're on mute, Frank. We can't hear you. I got a thumbs up, so I'm just going to take that as a yes. That this it puts the bill in the form that you desire. So I will move the A1, but we are going to need to hear from you at some point here. Okay, we're going to do a little timeout here. He needs a timeout on the play. Let me see here. Is there any other discussion? Well, give us just a moment here. We'll get to figure out what the problem is with Representative Hornstein. Well, why don't we do this? We can move it later and go to Representative Hornstein when we have audio from him. We have a list of testifiers, including Ethan Roberts, Kelly McCarthy, Rebecca Lucero, Commissioner of Human Rights, Keith Ellison, Attorney General, Bautau Urabi, Executive Director, Coalition of Asian American Leaders, and Eric Massell, Interim Executive Director of the Minnesota Post Board, is here for questions. Why don't we go until we have audio from Representative Hornstein? Let's go first to Mr. Roberts. Welcome back to the committee, Mr. Roberts. Please introduce yourself for the record and begin your testimony.
Thank you, Chair Lesh. My name is Ethan Roberts, and I am the Director of Government Affairs for the Jewish Community Relations Council of Minnesota and the Dakotas.
Thank you. Please proceed.
Thank you. Sorry. So in our capacity as the public affairs voice for Minnesota's Jewish community, one of our responsibilities at the JCRC is to track incidents of anti-Semitism and to some extent hate crimes and incidents more broadly. And so I can tell the committee that we had in 2012 8 reported incidents of anti-Semitism. However, by last year, 2019, we had 44 reported incidents of anti-Semitism. When we refer to an incident of anti-Semitism, this is an act of hate that is directed, that we know, against the Jewish community. So, for example, against a Jewish individual, an act of harassment or a property crime against a synagogue. We, however, do not include in these tallies incidents where it's not apparent that it's directed at the Jewish community. So I'll give 2 examples. The first example would be a message that came up last summer. It was graffitied on a public school in Minneapolis, and it said, Jews must die. It actually didn't use the word Jews. It used a word that's a slur, but I don't want to use that at a hearing, Zoom or not. That would be considered to be an anti-Semitic incident. However, swastikas, which are being found are alarming increase in some of the suburbs of the Minneapolis-St. Paul area, which don't have any content regarding Jews per se, are just considered to be hate incidents or hate crimes, because the swastika is hurtful, it's intimidating, it's harmful to more than Jews. The reason why we were excited to work with Representative Hornstein and the coalition that was put together by Outfront and CARE and JCA was because what we have seen is an increase not just in anti-Semitic incidents or hate incidents against the Jewish community or other communities. We've also seen property crimes on public property. Okay, so these are crimes because they're graffiti. No one has a right to paint a swastika on a public school or a public park. But they didn't necessarily fit evenly or directly within the existing statutory language. And so we worked with Representative Hornstein to bring forward new language, which was incorporated in the bill and passed out of public safety. Since that hearing, which felt like, I don't know, before the world came to an end, so months ago, we've heard from others, particularly from the Anti-Defamation League in Chicago, about some questions they had about the language. And so I was asked to speak to the amendment. What the amendment essentially does is two things. One, it restores the part of the statute, which has been there for some time, that works pretty well. And this is modeled after many other state statutes, including Wisconsin. It's been upheld by the Supreme Court unanimously. And that is when we know that a person or individual or a building has been targeted because it's a Jewish target or African-American or Muslim, then this part of the statute is tripped. So we're basically restoring that language. The second thing we're doing is we're making it more narrowly tailored, where those buildings are not at issue. We're moving the thrust from the impact it has on the individual back to the intent of the perpetrator, which is a kind of a more classical, more restrained, more conservative approach to this. And so while we had worked with Ben Johnson, who's been amazing in drafting the initial language, which we thought was good language, one of the nice things about the committee process is you can always make legislation better. And so here we've restored what was always good about the statute, and we have narrowed the new language so that it is more focused on the intent, the criminal intent of the perpetrator to either intimidate or harm people or groups of people based upon a protected class.
Thank you for your testimony, Ms. Roberts. Mr. Roberts. I'm trying to go through the list here, and what I'm planning on doing is to ask folks to testify, and then we'll hold questions for testifiers until the end. But it's my understanding that we do have Representative Hornstein live with us. Is that accurate, Representative Hornstein? Are you here? Can we hear you? Okay. Well, we'll check back with you when we've got audio. But we're going to go to Chief McCarthy. I know Chief McCarthy's here. Welcome back to the committee, Chief McCarthy. Please introduce yourself for the record and begin your testimony.
Thank you, Chair Lesh. My name is Kelly McCarthy, and I'm the current chief of the Mendota Heights Police Department. I'm before you in the committee this morning in support of House File 3837. I know firsthand the reluctance that victims feel in reporting bias-motivated crimes to the police. One of the many barriers to reporting these incidents to law enforcement is the lack of trust between some members of the community and the government. Providing alternative methods of reporting could help send the message that law enforcement wants to earn your trust and we take these issues seriously. As a police officer, I think it's important to note that this House file does not take activities that are currently considered legal and deem them as criminal. It just puts a finer point on data collection and attempts to acknowledge the real harm that can result from bias-motivated crimes. Currently, state statute mandates pre-service training, the preparation of a training course by the Post Board, and reporting requirements for the chief law enforcement officer. A mandatory policy could aid in accurate and uniform data collection, which in turn could aid in response and prevention. I thank the chair and the committee for your time this morning.
Thank you very much for your testimony, Chief McCarthy. Next, we are graced again with our illustrious Commissioner of Human Rights, Rebecca Lucero. Commissioner Lucero, are you here? Here you are.
Yeah, good morning. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, you sound great.
Okay, wonderful. So good morning, everyone. It's good to see everyone, even on a Zoom call like this. So, yep, my name is Rebecca Lucero, and I'm the Commissioner for the Department of Human Rights. And as you know, the Department of Human Rights is Minnesota's civil rights enforcement agency, and we oversee the Human Rights Act. The Minnesota Human Rights Act tasks the department with important enforcement duties to protect the civil rights of Minnesotans. And every Minnesotan is a member of many protected classes, whether it be your age, your sex, race, religion, disability status, or another protected class, which means that all of us are protected under the Human Rights Act. And all of us need a civil rights enforcement agency to turn to if we've been discriminated against because one of our protected class statuses. That's why we support Representative Hornstein's leadership on House File 3837, as well as the work of all of the other testifiers and stakeholders who have done so much important work on hate crimes and bias-motivated incidents. I know that all of us agree that hate crimes and discrimination should not be the part of the fabric of Minnesota. And, we've been doing a lot of work on this. So last month in April, the agency announced a discrimination helpline. And we've always taken intake calls, of course, but we wanted to make sure that we are amplifying the work of our agency, assuring Minnesota that we're here to investigate charges of discrimination. The helpline also gives us a basic understanding of some of the things that are going on across the state, especially when it comes to bias-motivated incidents. And that's an important initial step. Now, House File 3837 is that essential next step. It provides the tools necessary to better partner with community groups for a more holistic and accurate picture of what is going on, as well as provide us with the capacity necessary for the important partnerships with the Post Board to provide the training to address hate crimes within our community. At the department, we've seen several cases come to our office that fall under the scope of this bill. For example, we've had calls about nooses being hung at the workplaces or swastikas being graffitied on property. Recently, we have received an uptake in calls from Asian community members who have been yelled at in parking lots, grabbed in grocery stores, chased down the street, all because there's an increased rate of anti-Asian sentiment around COVID-19. Before schools were shut down and we moved to distance learning, we had a couple calls of Asian kids being yelled at in schools around COVID-19. So when we get these calls, we investigate them as potential acts of discrimination. However, many of these incidents are not actionable under the Human Rights Act. And because of loopholes and comfort in the system, we know that they're not being counted as hate crimes or not even being investigated as potential hate crimes, which means we don't have accurate data as a state to properly understand and then address these problems. That's why we need to have quality data, quality reporting, and quality training in place. We look forward to collaborating with schools, with community groups, with the Post Board, and all others to move forward on this. I'm happy to answer any questions. And thank you so much for the time today.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us for this bill, Commissioner Lucero. We also have with us our Attorney General, Keith Ellison. Mr. Ellison, are you here? I saw your little square on the Hollywood Squares here, but didn't see a face yet. I'll tell you what, pop up when you can, Mr. Ellison. We can go to Botau Urabi as well, if you're not quite ready. Ms. Taurabi, are you ready to go?
Yes, I'm on.
Excellent. Welcome to the committee. Please introduce yourself for the record.
Great. Thank you. Good morning, Chair Lesh and members of the committee. My name is Botau Urabi, and I'm the Executive and Network Director for the Coalition of Asian American Leaders. We are an organization that brings over 3,000 Asian Minnesotan leaders from across sectors, ethnic groups, and generations together to harness our collective power to ensure that Minnesota works for everyone. Today, I'm here in support of House File 3837 that aims to strengthen community capacity and expand reporting and training for our state to address crimes motivated by hate. As you may all already know, Asian Minnesotans comprise over 5% of our state's population. We are one of the youngest populations with a median age of 29. According to the state demographer, we are also the largest group of new working age adults. As a whole, we pay over $900 million in taxes to the state annually. These are important assets, but today I'm here to ask for your support of something no amount of resources we bring as a community can deter if we don't collectively stand together and proactively do more. Since January, our country and state has been significantly impacted by COVID-19. And though many leaders have denounced the use of terminology that perpetuates anti-Asian stigma, incidents of discrimination and violence have continued to increase. Starting in February, we at Cal began receiving messages from community members about COVID-related bias, discrimination, and violence targeting them. These incidents have included such things as spitting, physical and verbal harassment, and discriminatory service. For example, I received a text from a woman who shared that she and her husband went shopping for essentials at the Shakopee Walmart. When they were leaving, another customer followed them out to their car and shoved her husband around, accusing them of causing the coronavirus. They didn't call the police because they didn't believe anything would be done. They were shaken and now worried that they aren't safe doing basic things to take care of their family during this very difficult time. She said, "It was shoving this time, but what if the next person decides to run us over with their car or shoot us? If they hate us for being Asian, there's nothing we can do, and we're scared." In a recent poll, 32% of people indicate that they had witnessed people blaming Asian people for the coronavirus, while 60% of Asian American respondents in the same survey indicate that they had experienced discrimination during this crisis. Today, I'm also asking you to support House File 3837 because I do not want history repeated when a group of people ask
Attorney General Ellison, just going to have you mute your phone real quick. Oh, there we go. You got it. Okay, good.
Sorry.
I'm sorry. Go ahead, Ms. Urabi. I'll go ahead and finish up.
Sure. Today, I'm asking you to support House File 3837 because I do not want history repeated when a group of people is identified as a target for our collective pain. As elected leaders, I urge you to continue to use your positions to condemn language that creates stigma. But I also strongly urge you to do all that you can to improve how we address hate crimes as a state. While we cannot know the future, Asian Americans know from history how crises in America can lead to increased violence against them individually or collectively. From the Chinese Exclusion Act to the Japanese American internment to the killing of Vincent Chan, a Chinese American man who was killed while out celebrating his upcoming wedding. He was killed by two men who believed he was Japanese, and they blamed Japanese people for causing the auto industry crash. Already during this crisis in Texas, an Asian family was stabbed, including children aged 2 and 6, by another customer who believed they were spreading the coronavirus. Turning back to Minnesota, imagine arriving home to find this note taped to your door. "We're watching you. Take the Chinese virus back to China. We don't want you here infecting us with your diseases. Signed, your friendly neighborhood." A young Minnesotan couple who are of Hmong ethnicity came home to find this note taped to their door. How would you feel if that happened to your daughter, your son, cousin, niece, nephew, or friend? Hate crimes are happening in Minnesota, and House File 3837 provides you the opportunity to send a message that we do not support targeting communities, and we do not support making individuals in communities feel unsafe. I'll close by sharing that as a community organization, we understand that we hold the relationships and trust of our community members, and that's why we stand ready to collaborate with you in different state agencies to carry out the work that will make Minnesota safe for every community. We need you to do your part to strengthen our collective resolve and ability to address hate crimes. Please stand with us against the small minority of people who would target our community. Thank you for the opportunity to tell our story of what it's been like for Asian Minnesotans who are also experiencing COVID-19. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your testimony, Ms. Taurabi. And we're joined by Minnesota's Attorney General, Keith Ellison. And Mr. Ellison, go ahead and just hit *6. Oh, you're here on the video. So you're
right.
Ready to go. Welcome. Thanks.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and committee members. I definitely appreciate the opportunity to share points of view from the Attorney General's office on House File 3837. First of all, thank you to Representative Hornstein for asking my office to participate in today's hearing. And thank you, Chair Lesh, and all the members for allowing us to participate in the Judiciary Committee hearing today. My name is Keith Ellison, and I'm the Attorney General for the state of Minnesota. I'd like to talk about the background work our office has done so we could really, really dig deep and understand this issue in an updated, new way. This old issue that it still kind of stays with us and manifests in new forms all the time. We held 7 separate community meetings in 6 months on the issue of hate crimes. The community meetings took place in Fergus Falls, Chaska. We had 2 in Minneapolis, 1 at Temple Israel and 1 at Dar al-Hijra Mosque. We had 1 in St. Cloud, Rochester, St. Paul. We had hundreds of Minnesotans attend all the meetings, and they were a very diverse group, all religion, various political points of view, all racial backgrounds, creeds. We had a diverse set of people we talked to. Each meeting had a coalition of elected officials, both parties. At one point or another, we had Republicans and Democrats at least a few of all the hearings, particularly Rochester and St. Cloud and Fergus Falls. Each meeting had, and Chaska, each meeting had a diverse set of community leaders, municipal leaders as well. And the discussion is centered on essentially 3 things: building solidarity through community, because law enforcement, as important as it is, cannot make people love each other. At the end of the day, I'm hoping that this piece of legislation will help facilitate greater community connection, cohesion, discussion, so that when the rare case of a bias-motivated hate crime comes up, we can all stand together and say this is unacceptable. But the day-to-day stuff, we need community to be with us on. We also focus quite a lot on better ways of reporting potential hate crimes. Reporting is an issue. We need updating in this area. We need training in this area, training for police and community. After 7 community listening sessions, I then held an all-day hate crime summit in St. Paul in November 2019. There we had about 50 attendees, and the main panels included panels with law enforcement, community, and legislators. The law enforcement panel included representatives from the FBI, BCA, U.S. Attorney's Office. I want to thank U.S. Attorney Erica McDonald for sending her representative, and Ramsey County Attorney John Choi, who was present. The community panel included a representative from the Muslim American Society of Minnesota, Temple Israel, Outfront Minnesota, and Copal, a Latinx organization. The legislative panel included Representative Hornstein, Hassan, Senator Dibble, and then also Commissioner Lucero was gracious enough to join us. We thank her for that. Representative Hornstein's bill helps address one of the biggest takeaways from the summit, which was that the community wanted more options in reporting possible hate crimes. And by allowing the Department of Human Rights to track hate crimes, the bill seeks to give more reporting options to victims of hate crimes. The bill will also partially help the state gather more accurate data on hate crime occurrences. Right now, because of the underreporting, the data we have is not accurate and not reflective of the true nature and scope of hate crimes in Minnesota. With more people reporting the data, quality will improve as well. So I want to say, again, hats off to Representative Hornstein. Let me just wrap by saying that this issue is very critical to address. One of our earlier presenters talked about the spike in hate crimes against Asian Americans. Some of these calls come to our office at the Attorney General's office as well. We've seen this. We've seen some disturbing trends. We've seen all members of community be affected. And we've also seen that one of the things that all of the hate motivated organized groups share is that they're also anti-government, and so this is a generalized malevolence that we've seen. One of our speakers was Christian Picciolini, who was a former member of the neo-Nazis and had all the pictures and everything to prove it. And he had abandoned the group and started a group called After Hate. And he said, look, what we're talking about are groups here that are organizing among disaffected youth. They may target a racial group or a religious group, but they generally have an antipathy toward the whole of organized society oftentimes, and often are not just focused against one group, but have sort of a general issue that they're focused on, like the society is against them, and see themselves as victims. Let me wrap by saying I think it's critical that we pass this piece of legislation, that we update our training, and that we improve the things that law can do. But I think it's also important for all of us as leaders in the legislative and executive branch to go out there and talk about the importance for community solidarity and say we can disagree on a range of things, taxes, the role of government, let's debate it all, no problem. But let's agree that no one's race or background or religion, sexual orientation somehow excludes them from the protection of society. Let's agree that everybody's in. Let's agree on liberty and justice for all. So that's what I want to share today, and I do appreciate you all allowing me to appear today.
Thank you very much for your testimony, Attorney General, and for being here to speak.
Mr. Chair, can you hear me now?
Yes, I can. We can hear you, Chair.
Okay.
Thank you for joining us.
Sure.
And, we went through the testifiers, so now you can kind of introduce a few things and tell us about the bill and about what you were going to say beforehand.
Okay. Well, thank you, Mr. Chair and members. Thank you for hearing the bill. Sorry for the technical glitch. We switched computers in our house, and so this seems to be working. So I want to thank, first of all, you, Mr. Chair, and the committee for hearing this bill. And I think you've heard already some compelling testimony about why we're doing this. And I want to particularly thank several members of the committee, Representative Hassan, who I think will also have some comments. Representative Noor has been a wonderful partner. Representative Her, Representative Zhang, I thank you so much for your encouragement and your support throughout this process, and all of the folks that have testified today. And I think when I was starting to make the transition to this new computer, I heard Mr. Roberts talk about the amendment, and he was also mentioning some of the organizations involved. And I just want to make sure that they're properly acknowledged and thank the Coalition of Asian American Leaders, Council of American Islamic Relations, Jewish Community Action, Jewish Community Relations Council, Kajog, Outfront Minnesota, and others. We started working on this bill 2 years ago, and it took a while because we wanted to really make sure that we were responding to some community concerns. And I think you've already heard how the Asian American community in particular is vulnerable during this COVID-19 crisis. But in times of economic dislocation and social upheaval, I think those who are marginalized communities are at particular risk. And we're starting to see that. And some press reports surfaced over the weekend that that there is increased activity on the web and recruiting among extremist organizations. There's one theory that is making its way around the dark web that these organizations utilize, that the COVID-19 crisis is some kind of Jewish-Chinese conspiracy. So this is a fraught time, and I think there's no better time to have this discussion. Of course, we had this discussion prior to COVID-19. It's very timely now. It's going to be timely after we get out of this crisis as well. And so, we have had in Minneapolis, in and near the area I represent, incidents of anti-Semitic graffiti, racist graffiti on property targeting the African-American community. We have also seen, 1 out of every 5 hate crimes involves the LGBTQ community. And so all of the groups that are mentioned have issues with this problem. And so there is urgency to act. And so as you've heard, this is an important update to our existing hate crime statutes. We have the community reporting provisions that were discussed. We have the issues around property that Mr. Roberts so eloquently mentioned, and that's included in our amendment. And then, of course, the police training aspect. The Post Board has not updated their manual on this for about 30 years. So this is timely, and we appreciate so much Chief McCarthy's involvement here in this hearing. I just want to conclude with a personal story about why I'm carrying this bill and why it's so important to me. My parents are Holocaust survivors, and one of the reasons they survived is that Christians hid them out at great risk to themselves. My mom was hidden by Polish Catholic nuns in Warsaw for a time, and my father spent the last few months of the war hiding in a barn that a Hungarian farmer in rural Hungary sheltered him in. And those, what we call in our survivor community, righteous Christians, took such risks. If you were found hiding a Jew, you could be shot on sight. And so their courage is so inspiring to me, because I think they recognized that we are one human community, and that attack on one person is an attack on all. And so, you know, it's really in that spirit that I offer this, because, you know, we all have a responsibility to one another. And that lesson has just been such an important part of my life over so many years. And so, you know, we want to make sure that Minnesota is a welcoming place, that hate is not welcome here. Hate has no home here. And this bill, I think it's a modest bill, but as I think a couple of the testifiers said earlier, it does send a strong message that we as Minnesotans care about this issue, and we are going to empower communities and law enforcement to give them the tools they need to feel safer and more secure now and into the future. So thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, Chair Hornstein, for presenting this. We had a few questions, but first we're going to adopt the A1 amendment because we haven't done that. And so I believe that was my motion to adopt the A1 amendment. Any discussion on the A1 amendment? Seeing none, then all in favor of the A1 amendment signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
All opposed to the A1 amendment signify by saying no. The A1 amendment is adopted. Then to the testimony, we have a question list. There is first Representative Mahler for a question for Commissioner Lucero, and then we have Representative Albright, who has a question for Attorney General Ellison, and then Representative Robbins as well. So go ahead, Representative Mahler.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I didn't have a question for the commissioner. I just wanted to say, with respect to the amendment that we just adopted, I really appreciate the work that was done on that language. I had some questions about the intent aspect of the bill when it was before us in public safety, which I worked out anyway with the old language, but I think that this is even better. So I just wanted to thank the author and Mr. Roberts for your comments on the amendment, and thanks to Representative Hornstein for bringing this bill. Thanks.
Thank you, Representative Mahler. That was my mistake. That was Representative Lucero, who had a question for the AG, not you, a question for Commissioner Lucero. I get it. Thank you, Rachel. So Representative Lucero, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Let me unmute
You muted yourself.
Thank you. Don't confuse the Luceros. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So the question for the Attorney General, as I'm looking at the bill and as I heard you speak there is language in the bill pertaining to gender identity. And this reminds me of a video I actually saw probably about a year ago on YouTube, where there was a gas station and a customer, a man, was in the gas station, and the clerk addressed the customer as a man, but the man thought he was a woman, and he went into just a tirade and a fit. And so my question is, Mr. Attorney General, how would you criminally enforce a man who demanded he be referred to as a woman? And would that be a crime or some other kind of perceived bias?
You know, Rebecca,
Attorney General.
Representative, there was a little bit of distortion when you were coming through. Did you ask when there was a person who was identified as transgender who was addressed in a different gender than they identify with, and that caused a violation of the statute. Am I right about that?
Yes, there was clearly a man who was confused and believed he was a woman and demanded he be addressed as a woman. Would that be an example of gender bias?
Well, I can tell you this, that it's clear that it doesn't violate the criminal code. It's not a criminal statute. It sounds like one of those unpleasant interactions that people have every day. Not every offensive thing is a crime, right? Not everything that happens would be considered a criminal act. It's not a damage to property. It doesn't sound like an assault. It doesn't sound like any sort of a terroristic threat. So as you're explaining it, it doesn't really sound like an actionable criminal matter. But I can tell you that the point here is that transgender people are targeted for violence at a shocking degree. I mean, their level of homicide and being victims of homicide is extremely high. So in that unfortunate gas station scenario, I don't think that we're talking about a crime here, but I do think that, what we're talking about is just neighbors need to just try to work it out. We need to build more education, more sensitivity, and find better ways to communicate and treat each other. That's my best answer for you.
Thank you. Representative Lucero?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. That's all I have.
Thank you. We have then Representative Albright.
Thank you, Chair Lesh. I just want to make sure that my audio is working.
I can hear you.
Thank you. My question goes to the Attorney General. Attorney General, I think kind of a base premise upon which we hold pretty dear to is our First Amendment, and I think I would agree with you that we can't, unfortunately, make everyone love one another, but I do think that we can certainly adhere to the point that we need to respect the rights that each one of us are afforded under the Constitution. But the First Amendment to the U.S. Constitution, does protect speech, no matter how offensive its content might be. And it doesn't protect behavior that crosses that line into targeted harassment or threats or creating a hostile environment. Merely offensive or bigoted speech does not rise to that level. Hate speech does not have a legal definition under U.S. law. Just as there's no legal definition for rudeness, evil ideas, unpatriotic speech, or any other kind of speech that might, condemn. So in the context of this bill, I want to make it clear that my question is not to offend anyone, but to go to the fundamental right that we are seeking with any law that we place into statute. And so I would greatly appreciate if you would clearly outline for the members of this committee and those in the public sphere that are listening in, from your position as the Attorney General, what is the difference between hate crimes speech and the comparison contrast with our First Amendment rights?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair, Representative Albright. Thank you for the question. So I think it goes essentially to when the Supreme Court looked at a very critical case. I think it was Brandenburg versus Ohio, in which it did uphold. It took up this issue as the line between when speech could be considered to be criminalized, and it would have to be create an imminent threat of unlawful and or danger or harm. The threat would have to be imminent, and it would have to be immediately clear that it would be an incitement to violation of law. And so you can stand up at a podium and say, I don't like blacks. What you cannot say is, go hurt that black person walking across the street. Now, they're both speech. One of them you can say, and you have a right to say, and there are many cases in which the Nazis and the Klan have a protected right to lawfully demonstrate and protest. I support it. The Constitution supports it. But what you can't do is have an imminent incitement to violence. So that's really kind of where the line is. So what is a crime? The crime is, damage to property. If you do it because the person is Asian, that's a bias-motivated crime. Assaults, terroristic threats, and criminal trespass, things like that. On the other hand, if you get a permit and you want to, burn a cross, you can, That's why I started out by saying this, Representative Albright. There is a limit to what the law can do, but the law must do what it can do. The law can't say, well, we can't make people love each other, so we can't do anything. No, we need to improve training. We need to improve recording. We need to, update this bill to make it an effective tool for law enforcement. But the reason I did all those community meetings is because I knew that you can harbor hatred against your fellow American for, what I believe are illegitimate reasons. So what we want to do is have a discussion, a dialogue. And I think that the real work is at the community level, which is going to help bring people together and see that we are all Americans. We all have the right to liberty and justice. And for all means all, no, there's no exceptions. So I hope that answers your question, Representative.
Representative Albright?
Mr. Chair, Attorney General, I appreciate the answer. And I think that you and I are in agreement on the point that unfortunately in this environment, tempers and feelings are very raw. And just as we've sadly observed against the faith communities across the state, that even though we in the First Amendment need to tolerate speech, although it may quite literally be very insulting and outrageous, those actions that provide or actually infer injury or the inference of harm against another, certainly that's what your office is called to protect. The old adage, sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me. And so I think that going into this, and I certainly support Representative Hornstein and the work of the JCRC. We want to make sure that people in the faith community and those that have difference of opinions than our own on various matters are respected for their viewpoint. But that is not to assert that their viewpoints are imposed upon others in some unfair or unfashionable manner. And so, tolerance is something that is an ambiguous word that certainly takes on a definition with regard to any group that you're talking to. I appreciate your comments, and I appreciate the work that Chair Hornstein has done over the years on this. And I look forward to working continuously with my good friend from Minneapolis on this. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Albright. We have Representative Robbins, Scott, O'Neill, Johnson, and we need to wrap up in 10 minutes. And I need to clarify as well for purposes of time, will the A2 amendment be offered for discussion so that I can plan time on this as well too, or will it not be offered?
No, Mr. Chair.
Chair Scott.
The answer is no, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you, Chair Scott. Representative Robbins.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Chair Hornstein, and the other members for bringing forward this bill. I remember talking to Chair Hornstein about this back in February, and I'm 100% on board with the intent of what you are doing here, and also spoke with Ethan at JCRC back in February. I was reviewing my notes for that from those conversations over the weekend, and I was very happy to see the work that you've all done and many others involved, like Representative Mueller on the A1 amendment. It really addresses my main concerns about importing disparate impact theory into the felony crime portion of the bill. I had significant concerns about changing the intent language and allowing that additional impact analysis. So I really am supportive of the A1 amendment, and I appreciate all your hard work on that. And I did just want to raise a concern I have about the reporting part. I think reporting is good. Understanding what's going on in the community is good. So I don't disagree with that. But I did want to raise a concern about the language that is talking about whether you're getting reports from community organizations, school districts, charter schools, individuals regarding a crime a community member believes are motivated. So the community member believes, and I think we need to somehow get at this, but I'm just not sure that language is great. And so I just want to encourage people to keep working on that. In my community, we've had some great tragedies, including this past weekend, I have to say, and then a few months back. And if you follow Nextdoor or some of those Facebook neighborhood groups, there's a lot of things community members believe that I would say the police or others don't think are accurate. And I just think we have to be careful about how we're collecting that data and imposing it as factual or evidence when community member belief is not always accurate or even necessarily well informed. So I'm a little concerned about that language. And I also want to clarify for the record, there was something interesting in Morning Take today that said I was offering an amendment, which I was not. And that just is another example of misinformation put out even by professionals, because I was not part of that, and Floyce has issued a correction, but I don't know where that came from. But I just want to share that as an example of maybe well-intended people, but incorrect information. So that's just my caution to people as this language moves forward. But I really appreciate the hard work that's been done on this bill, and especially the A1. So I really appreciate everyone's hard work. And I really do want to just echo the comments of my colleagues that we all need to make sure that in our community, speech is protected, but also the rights of minorities are protected. And hopefully we can all continue to be voices for tolerance and respect for people, regardless of our differences on beliefs. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Robbins. Chair Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I had some questions, and thank you for the really good conversation. Representative Hornstein and I spoke on the phone yesterday, and it's always a good time to talk to Chair Hornstein. And I thank you for reaching out and chatting with me about some concerns with the bill. And one of my concerns, well, I guess really one of the reasons that the bill's in our possession in this committee is to talk about the data. And so I have some questions if Commissioner Lucero is still on the line. I think she is. There she is. So Commissioner Lucero, I'm wondering what data sets you plan to collect here in regard to this bill.
Commissioner Lucero.
Chair Lesh, Representative Scott, thank you. Yeah, let me talk a little bit about what we do and have done for a very long time. So when somebody calls our office to report a potential Human Rights Act violation, or in this case, a crime motivated by bias or a potential hate crime, we ask a variety of questions. So first we ask for, I would say 3 buckets really. You've got your name, your contact info. Next, we ask jurisdiction questions. So when did it occur and where did it occur? And then the third bucket, I would say, is situational questions. What occurred? Who did it occur with? Who was around? Who witnessed it? How often did it occur? et cetera. So those are the kinds of questions that we regularly ask as we take in calls in our office, and that would be similar to what we would plan on doing in this situation as well.
Chair Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And so to Commissioner Lucero, thank you for that answer. I'm assuming that the data that you would turn over to, I believe it's the governor's office, or any data that you turn over, I'm assuming you would de-identify that data?
Commissioner Lucero.
Thank you, Chair. Representative Scott. So I think reading the statute, we're working with the post board to make sure that we can provide some model language and training. And so the first thing that we would do is we would put together a joint powers agreement with the post board that would be in alignment with the statute, and it would be narrow to allow us to share the data that can be used to help inform training and model policies. Our department has joint power agreements with other agencies, so it's common practice for us, and that would be what we would do first. Yeah.
Chair Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And so, Mr. Chair, maybe you know the answer to this question. In cases where they have these joint powers agreements, like the commissioner is speaking of, does the legislature weigh in with statute and put parameters around what can be shared, how it can be shared, and those sorts of things? Maybe if you don't know, maybe staff does. I don't know.
So, Chair Scott, I know we have. I don't know if that's required, but I would ask if either Mr. Johnson or Ms. Mullen could speak to that. Are you asking whether it's required that the legislature place those parameters within designated joint powers agreements?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm just asking that question, and in these joint power agreements, do the two agencies that want to share information, can they do it without legislative authority? Can they share the information without legislative authority?
Okay, fair enough. Mr. Johnson, do you know the answer to that?
Mr. Chair, members, Ben Johnson with House Research. So the data is going to be classified in some way, and depending on the classification of that data will control what can be shared. They can only share the data as long as it's consistent with statute in other places. So if they're authorized to share that data, there are, as both of you know well, provisions where data can be shared between government agencies for various purposes. If it's authorized under that, then the sharing would be acceptable. They should not be able to share data outside the parameters of the existing statute.
Okay, Chair Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So with those comments in mind, and I did mention this to Chair Hornstein yesterday, I think that this language needs to be specific on how the data will be classified, what data sets that are going to be shared, and you know, I wish we could put word out to every legislator that if your bill has anything to do with data at all, you have to have some parameters around that data. And and I know Representative Hornstein from our conversation, and you can get it on the record here, that you're amenable to putting some of those parameters in place. And that question goes, Mr. Chair, to Representative Hornstein.
Chair Hornstein.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Representative Scott. Yes, I mean, you know, the purpose of having hearings is to sort of improve bills as they move through the process. And we did spend a lot of time with the Department of Human Rights on this. So, and it's come a long way from where we started. You know, they have been fantastic partners. And so we will definitely, you know, take a look at that section and see if some modifications can take place.
Chair Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I see the value in collecting the data. I'm not objecting to that. I just want parameters around it like we do everything else. And then Representative Hornstein and I had also visited a little bit about the fiscal note on this. And I'm really torn on how to vote today because I believe in the spirit of this bill, but we're facing an unprecedented budget deficit. And before this gets to Ways and Means, I'd really like to see that fiscal note tackled and see if there's any way to make it have a zero or very, very minimal fiscal note. So I don't know if the commissioner wants to weigh in on that as far as
Well,
the fiscal note. Mr. Chair?
Chair Scott, if Commissioner does weigh in, and I mean, we have a few minutes left. Ways and Means starts in 2 minutes. So we really got to get moving. And we still have Representative O'Neill and Johnson who need to speak. But Commissioner, can you just give a real quick answer on that?
Yes, if I can unmute myself. Yes, what I want to say is we really want to make sure we do this work really well. And to do this work well, we do need some staff to be able to do it. We think this is a very reasonable amount of money needed to a reasonable investment for an issue that has been harming our communities for decades. It's really low. We worked hard to keep it low.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair Scott. Reps O'Neill and Johnson, I apologize. I'm going to have your comments be very restricted because we have to get through a roll call before House TV cuts us off and moves to Ways and Means. So please go ahead, Reps O'Neill.
Mr. Chairman, also the fiscal note, same thing that Chair Scott just said. And I was really hoping to hear that the Department of Human Rights could actually just shift some staff or something. So unfortunately, I can't vote for this bill because it still has a significant cost and we don't have any money. So I would love to vote for this bill. I think it's a great bill, but unless the Department of Human Rights can just shift staff to do this, I can't support it. It's too expensive, I think.
Thank you for those comments. And I apologize for us having to restrict your comments, Reps O'Neill. Chair Johnson, same thing.
Chair Lasholder, my concerns as well. I also have concerns on the continuing ed credit requirements. Right now, 1/3 of a police officer's training requirements is already on bias. And to add this on top of that, they're going to have to take away from either crisis intervention, mental illness crisis, conflict management, mediation, and recognizing value in community diversity. We're adding so much on there that they can't do the other training requirements they also have. Right now, training requirements, depending where they are in their license cycle, is all mandated. They can't do the things that their department or their community want because they've run out of funding. We're looking at probably a couple $2 million in mandates on our local community besides what the state has just for the training of these officers.
Thank you, Chair Johnson. This House File 3878, as amended, has been recommended to be re-referred to Ways and Means. The committee legislative assistant will take the roll. Chair votes aye.
Representative Moeller.
Yes.
Representative Scott.
No.
Representative Albright.
Pass.
Representative Barr.
No.
Representative Cantrell.
Aye.
Representative Carlson.
Aye.
Representative Considine.
Aye.
Representative Hassan.
Aye.
Representative Herr.
Aye.
Representative Johnson.
No.
Representative Liebling.
Aye.
Representative Lucero.
No.
Representative Mariani.
Aye.
Representative Noor.
Aye.
Representative O'Neill.
No, there's no money.
Representative Robbins.
No.
Representative Zhang.
Yes.
On a vote of 11 ayes and 6 nays, the motion prevails. House File 3837 as amended, and 1 abstention. House File 3837 as amended is recommended to be re-referred to Ways and Means Committee.